A father's promise. The village of Karam, nestled between golden fields and dusty trails, seemed untouched by time. Life here moved with the rhythm of the seasons, simple, quiet, and unbothered by the chaos of cities. Amidst this stillness stood a modest mud brick house with a creaking wooden gate. It was home to Karam Din, a farmer with weathered hands, kind eyes, and a heart full of quiet strength. Karam Din had not always been alone. His wife, Ruxana, had passed away 16 years ago, leaving behind 3 young daughters and a promise etched into his soul. Raise them with dignity and never let them feel incomplete without a mother, she had whispered, her hands slipping from his as her breath faded. Since that day, Karam Din lived for his daughters. He never remarried. He never complained. His days were spent in the fields, and his nights with his girls, his only joy in the world. His eldest, Gul Bano, was 22 now. Strong and sharp, she had taken over the household early. She cooked, managed expenses, and had the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much too young. Her eyes were her mother's, steady and calm, but always watchful. Noor Jahan, 19, was the dreamer. She spent her evenings on the roof, scribbling poetry on old notebooks. Her world was made of words and colors the village never saw. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was with depth that surprised even her sisters. The youngest, Chandni, 16, was still in school. Mischievous and lively, she was the sunshine of the house. She often ran barefoot through the village, returning home with wildflowers in her hair and stories in her laughter. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, Karam Din would sit on the charpai outside his house and sip his weak tea. He would watch his daughters wake one by one, Gul heading straight to the kitchen, Noor moving quietly with a book in hand, Chandni groaning about her school uniform. They were his pride. They were his strength. But the village didn't always see it that way. 3 daughters, no son, the shopkeeper would say, with a sympathetic headshake. It's a burden, muttered an old man at the mosque once. No one to carry the name. Karam Din would smile politely and walk away. What they didn't know, what they could never understand, was that his name lived in their laughter, his legacy written in their eyes. That evening, after a long day in the field, Karam Din returned home with a slight limp. His knees ached more than usual. The wheat harvest hadn't been great this year. He counted the money in his pouch, barely enough for flour and oil. Meat was out of the question again. Inside, the girls had lit a lantern. Gul Bano was serving lentils and roti. Noor had placed wildflowers in a small vase on the table, while Chandni excitedly talked about her teacher praising her essay on my father. I wrote how you're stronger than all the men in the village, she said with pride, placing a chapati on his plate. Even without a stick, you beat all the old uncles. Karam Din chuckled, wincing slightly as he Saturday, don't write too many truths, beta. They'll get jealous. The 4 of them ate together, hands moving in practiced rhythm, laughter echoing in the small room. There was no television, no fancy fan, no fridge, but their warmth was richer than any luxury. Later that night, when the girls had gone to sleep, Karam Din stepped outside again. He looked up at the stars. It was quiet, the kind of silence only a rural night could bring. He thought of Ruxana. They're growing fast, he murmured. Too fast. He sat down on the charpai, rubbing his aching knees. The years had been hard, and they hadn't made him rich. But they had made him grateful. For every moment, every smile, every struggle. I couldn't give them everything, he whispered, but I never let them feel alone. A soft breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere far, a dog barked. Karam Din closed his eyes. That promise, made 16 years ago beside a dying woman, still held him like a rope pulled tight around his chest. He had built his life around it, shaped every day with it, suffered silently under it. And yet, it had become his anchor. They said a man without sons was a man without legacy. But Karam Din knew better. His legacy was alive, in Gul's strength, Noor's words, and Chandni's fire. His name would live on, not on a gravestone or shop sign, but in the world his daughters would shape. And under that starlit sky, Karam Din smiled. Tomorrow, he would rise again, just like he always had, The trials begin. The dry heat of summer rolled over Kot Karam like a heavy blanket. Dust clung to clothes and air alike. The wheat harvest had been poor, and the ground now cracked beneath the weight of disappointment. For farmers like Karam Din, each season was a gamble. And this time he was losing. In the corner of the courtyard, he sat with a ledger in his lap, his brow furrowed. The numbers didn't add up. Fertilizer, seed, borrowed money, the broken water pump. The crop hadn't covered the cost. He looked across the yard, where Gul Bano was washing clothes in a metal tub, her sleeves rolled up and her forehead damp with sweat. She glanced up and caught his stare. "Abba, don't worry. We'll manage. We always do." He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, Beta, Allah will provide." But even as he said it, a shadow passed through the gate. It was Chaudhry Iftikhar, the village landlord and moneylender. His belly bulged beneath a white kurta, and his mustache twitched with disdainful confidence. He held the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Karam Din," he called. "I've come to talk." Karam rose slowly, brushing the dust from his shower. "Come in, Chaudhry Sahib." They sat under the neem tree. Iftikhar didn't waste time. "You still owe me 12,000 rupees. That's 2 harvests overdue." "I know," Karam said quietly. "I just need time. This season was a failure. You have no way to repay." But he leaned forward, voice oily. "I have a solution." Karam's chest tightened. "You marry off Gul Bano to my nephew, Tariq. He needs a wife, someone obedient, village-bred. If the match happens, I'll erase your debt. Clean slate." Karam's mouth went dry. Gul Bano? To that man? He knew Tariq. Arrogant, unkind, twice divorced. "I appreciate the offer," he said stiffly, "but my daughter's not for trade." Iftikhar's expression hardened. "Think carefully. You're drowning in debt. I'm offering a hand. Refuse me, and I'll take your land as payment." He stood and walked off without another word. That night, Karam sat in silence at the dinner mat. The girls noticed his mood. "Abba, is something wrong?" Noor asked softly. He shook his head. "Nothing I can't handle." But Gul Bano wasn't convinced. She waited until the others were asleep, then sat beside him. "I heard him, the Chaudhry. I was hanging clothes when he came." Karam looked away. "It's not your burden. I'm the eldest. I've always helped carry it." Her voice didn't tremble. "If you want me to marry him, I will." He turned to her sharply. "Never say that again. You're not a payment. You're not for sale." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. Over the next week, things worsened. The sun grew harsher, the water pump failed again, and the grocer refused further credit. Karam sold one of their goats to cover school fees for Chandni. Meanwhile, Noor Jahan had a secret. Late at night, while everyone slept, she wrote poetry, essays, little stories. She'd been sending them to a women's magazine in Lahore. And last week, one of her poems was published under her pen name, Roshni. They even mailed her 500 rupees for it. She hid the money in an old biscuit tin beneath her bed. One evening, she sat on the roof, a small oil lamp flickering beside her. She reread her poem in print for the 10th time. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her words. Her hope. Below, Chandni was scolded at school again. Some boys had laughed at her torn shoes. She cried in the bathroom, wiped her face, and told no one. Back home, she tried to smile, but Karam noticed the change. He sat her down that night. "You know what shoes don't matter?" he asked. She shook her head. "The ones that carried Hazrat Khadija to the Prophet's side. The ones that walked miles to fetch water for their children. The ones that taught a nation without stepping in a palace." Chandni blinked. "Whose shoes were those?" He smiled. "They belong to strong women. Like your sisters. Like you." Her lips curled into a small smile. "Even if they're broken, especially if they're broken, that's when strength shows." That night, the house had no meat, no fan, and no money, but there was warmth. Noor smiled secretly, her tin of savings under her bed. Gul Bano added water to the lentils without complaint. Chandni helped fix her own school bag with needle and thread. And Karam Din, he sat outside under the same stars, wondering how he'd survive the coming months. He didn't know the storm would come sooner than he thought. But what he did know, as he watched his daughters through the open window, was that he had already raised 3 miracles: storm and shelter. The monsoon arrived with no warning. One evening, the air turned cool, the skies turned gray, and by midnight it began to pour. The rain fell in sheets, drenching the village, flooding streets, and turning fields into mud pits. The roof of Karam Din's house leaked in 3 places, and by dawn, a portion of the courtyard wall had collapsed. Inside, the family gathered around a flickering lantern. Gul Bano placed buckets under the leaks, while Chandni held towels over the shelves to protect their few belongings. Noor silently helped her father shift the charpai away from the crumbling wall. Karam Din coughed harshly, but waved off their concern. "Just cold air," he said. "This rain is Allah's test." Outside, the fields had turned into swamps. Whatever hope they had for a small harvest had been washed away. Karam tried to go out the next morning to assess the damage, but his legs gave way. Gul Bano rushed to him and helped him sit down. "You've been coughing for days," she said. "You need a doctor." "We can't afford." "I'll take care of it," she cut in firmly. She had already made up her mind. That same afternoon, a man from the city arrived with his family to visit the Chaudhry's house. He was Imran, a school teacher from Lahore, a distant cousin of Chaudhry Iftikhar. He was polite, clean-spoken, and newly looking for a bride. When he met Gul Bano during a community tea event organized to show off the village girls, something in her quiet strength struck him. Unlike the others, she didn't try to impress. She barely spoke, but her eyes, steady and self-assured, stayed with him. 2 days later, a proposal came for Gul Bano. From Imran, not the Chaudhry. Karam Din was stunned. "I cannot give my daughter to a city man," he said. "Why not, Abba?" Gul asked gently. "He's not like the others. He spoke to me with respect. He asked what I liked, not what I could cook." Karam sat in silence. "How will I survive without you?" he finally whispered. "You won't be without me," she said. "You raised us to stand on our feet. Let me walk now." He didn't answer that night, but something inside him began to loosen. Meanwhile, Noor Jahan's secret couldn't stay hidden much longer. One evening, Karam Din entered her room to place some dry firewood and found the biscuit tin open on the floor. Inside were several crumpled envelopes, each with a small note of payment and letters addressed to Roshni. "Noor," he asked. She stepped into the room slowly. "I wanted to tell you," she said softly. "I've been writing. They published me. People read my words, Abba." He held up the envelopes. "This is your money?" She nodded. "For the house. For medicine. I saved it all." Karam's throat tightened. He had always told himself that daughters were not a burden. But seeing her sacrifice, her art turned into survival. It struck him how deeply they carried his weight, even without him asking. He placed a hand on her head. "Your mother would have been proud." That night, Noor gave him half the money for medicine. The rest, she said, would be saved for Chandni's schoolbooks. Days later, hope glimmered from an unexpected corner. Chandni had entered an inter-school competition, an essay titled "The Strongest Person I Know." She had written about her father. A few weeks later, the school principal arrived at their home unannounced. With him was a certificate, a box of sweets, and a letter from the district education board. Chandni had won. The letter offered her a scholarship, tuition, books, and a monthly stipend to attend a girls' college in the nearby town. First in her village. First in her family. Karam Din was speechless. "I didn't think they'd even read it," Chandni said, almost in disbelief. "But they said my words were real, that it felt like I was telling the truth." He looked at her, his youngest, the one he used to carry on his back to school, the one with flowers always tangled in her braid. "You told the truth, Beta," he said, "and the truth always shines." In a matter of weeks, the family had shifted. Gul's wedding was set for next month. Noor was being invited to read her poetry at a women's library in the city. Chandni's uniform had changed from schoolgirl to college student. And Karam Din, though still weak, smiled more often. The villagers started to speak differently now. "Look at Karam Din's daughters," they'd say, one better than the other. What they didn't see was what it had cost. The nights of hunger, the unpaid bills, the walls patched by hand, the dreams folded and tucked away. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they had endured the storm, and together, they had become each other's shelter. A name that lives on. The house felt quieter now. After Gul Bano's wedding, the room seemed larger, the evening slower. Her absence hung in the air, not heavy with sadness, but full of memories. The clang of her bangles in the kitchen, her calm voice during disputes, her careful budgeting written on the back of receipts, all gone with her, carried to her new home in Lahore. But she wasn't far in heart. Every Friday, her letter arrived, handwritten, full of updates. How her husband Imran encouraged her to finish her education, how she was learning to use a sewing machine, how she missed the sound of the neem tree in the courtyard. And always at the bottom, she wrote, "Take care of Abba, and tell him I'm still his daughter, no matter where I am." Karam Din read those lines aloud each time, holding back tears, pride glowing in his tired eyes. Noor Jahan had bloomed in her own quiet way. Her poems had found a place in city magazines and women's journals. One morning, a man in a black coat arrived at their home. He was from a Lahore publishing house. "We want to compile our poems," he told Karam Din. "A small book. We'll pay royalties." Karam looked at Noor, stunned. She blushed but held her ground. "If you say no, Abba, I'll respect it." He didn't answer for a moment. Then he nodded, his voice catching. "Your words are yours, Beta. Let the world read them." When her book, Roshni, Word from a Village Girl, was released, they received a copy in the mail. Noor placed it gently in her mother's old trunk, beside a fading photograph and a pair of silver bangles. It was her way of saying, "Look, Ammi, I made something real." Chandni, too, was growing fast. College had changed her. She walked taller now, spoke with confidence, and had begun tutoring village girls in the afternoons. With part of her stipend, she bought an extra fan for her father's room. On weekends, she helped him manage the farm's records, offering suggestions with the bluntness of youth and the insight of someone who had known struggle. One day, she came home with a strange request. "Abba," she said, "the college is hosting a community event. They want a guest speaker to talk about raising daughters. I told them about you." He blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you. They want you to speak." Karam Din had never spoken to more than 10 people at once. The idea terrified him. But when the day arrived, he wore his cleanest shower kameez, combed back his white hair, and stood in front of over 100 people, students, parents, teachers. "My name is Karam Din," he began, voice steady. "I had 3 daughters. People used to say I had no sons, that I was unlucky." He paused. "But today, one of my daughters teaches, one writes books, and one is becoming a lawyer. And I ask you, if this is misfortune, then what does success look like?" The hall burst into applause. Later, Chandni slipped her hand into his. "You were amazing." He chuckled. "I forgot half my speech." No one noticed. "You spoke from the heart." Back in the village, things had changed too. The same people who once pitted him now praised him. The Chaudhry no longer made offers, and his nephews crossed the street when Karam walked by. Other fathers started investing more in their daughter's schooling. One even asked Noor for help enrolling his child in the city school. But Karam Din didn't let the praise go to his head. He still rose early, still sat under the neem tree, still sipped his weak tea and prayed for rain, health, and enough roti for the day. Only now, he wasn't afraid. One evening, a journalist came from the city. He had heard about the father of daughters and wanted to write an article. Karam agreed. But when asked what he wanted the headline to be, he said, "Not my story. Theirs." Years passed. The house slowly filled again, with Gul's visits, Noor's books, Chandni's debates, and the laughter of new children born into the family. Karam Din grew older, his steps slower, his breath shorter. But his heart never dimmed. And when, one spring morning, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, the entire village came to his funeral. Not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, but because he had lived with dignity, with faith, and with love. On his gravestone, the daughters wrote, "Here lies Karam Din, a farmer, a father, and a man who raised queens." And so, though the man returned to the soil he once tilled with his bare hands, his name lived on, not in marble, not in gold, but in every girl who dared to dream and every father who believed in her.